talk about horror games in the horror game community, we talk about games that are available for different systems, referring exclusively to console systems. When we do talk about horror games that are also on PC, we're talking about just that, console-first games that also have PC ports. Nowadays, and by nowadays I mean in the last decade and a half give or take, the PC has been in a really good place when it comes to horror. It not only gets ports of most of the horror games that come out for consoles, but it also has its own scene of spooky first-person horror games, a scene that was born from the ashes of Amnesia, as the release of that game perfectly collided with the rise of YouTube Screamo Let's Players. Due to that boom, there were a lot of money to be made in horror on the PC, and it didn't have to cost a lot of money and could often be made by just one person, due to how low the requirements were to constitute what a good horror game was for that audience. We are today completely spoiled for choice when it comes to good horror on the PC, and is probably the biggest genre of games in the indie scene ever since survival games died out. But as I alluded to earlier, it wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, about 20 years ago, if PC players wanted to get their freak on, they had to put up with the garbage tier PlayStation ports of Resident Evil and later Silent Hill. Or did they? Because while the release schedule for PC horror games during this time is looking really light, there were still horror games. They just weren't commercially available products that you could buy at a store. They were mods and they were free, and some of them are really fucking good, and a few of them are some of my favorite horror experiences. So I know most people clicking on this video know what these are, but for the few in the back, let me explain. When Half-Life came out in 1998, Valve made the brilliant move to create and publish the tools that they had used to make the game, so that normal people could try their own hand at either modifying the existing game Half-Life or even make their own. This is sort of how we got the official expansions Opposing Force and Blue Shift for Half-Life 1 and Counter-Strike, and the much lesser known Gunman Chronicles. Dozens of high-profile game design people got their start just messing around with the heavily modified Quake 2 engine, aka the Gold Source engine that Half-Life was made in, and as a result, we have today an enormous library of games that all share a similar aesthetic presentation because they all have that look that the engine allows for, and use at least some of the same base game Half-Life 1 assets. And I love that aesthetic, and it's probably my favorite video game aesthetic and look. And I love horror games, and I love free stuff. So join me as I take a look at some underrated Gold Source horror games. And I can think of no better place to start than with Afraid of Monsters. While it wasn't my introduction to the world of Gold Source horror, it was certainly one of the first ones I can remember really standing out for what the consoles had to offer at the time. Originally released in 2005 and later updated with the director's cut, the game opens up as we, the protagonists of the story, have finally, after battling mental illness for a really long time, come to the hospital to seek help. Unfortunately for us, we're just a bit too late, and while waiting for our next appointment, we experience an episode, and we find ourselves wandering down a series of trippy hallways and following a series of red dots. Something begins to chase us and we run, but before we know it, we're back in the hospital, but something is not like it was just a minute ago. Everything is the same, but it's changed somehow. Like the building we're in itself, it's aged and decayed centuries over the course of minutes. And we're not alone, or rather, we're at least not the only entity around, because there is definitely something alive inside the walls. I'm guessing that our doctor's appointment has been cancelled, so let's try and get out of here and go home. Which is easier said than done, because if I had to describe Afraid of Monsters in a single statement, it would be that Afraid of Monsters is pants-shittingly scary. Something about the combination of retro 3D graphics of geometrically simple objects, actual photographs used as textures, and that instantly recognizable sound design composed of recycled effects from Half-Life 1 It has a feel, it makes you uneasy, something about it looks wrong and it puts you on edge, and your character's movement speed being that on the levels of Sonic the Hedgehog compared to more modern and slower paced horror games makes the simple act of interacting with the world feel off. The whole thing creates an atmosphere that is just built for horror, and I know I'm not the only one of this opinion because I'm making a video about a whole genre of these things. Very few things can make me into that mode where I don't want to progress because I don't want to know what is on the other side, and when a game finally does catch me like that, it usually has a bit more of a wind-up time to do so. Afraid of Monsters had me completely wound up from the time the tutorial was over. I found myself creeping around corners and double checking every room I was in, even without having encountered a single enemy. I even found something as mundane as an open window that led to a ledge outside that I could use to enter a part of the building that was locked was completely wigging me out. I was completely losing it. I even quit. See, I had just moved. I was in my very big and very empty house completely alone, and I was in a bit of a mood that day, and it was completely pitch black outside. I had forgotten how completely unsettling this game is. So by the 20-minute mark, the masterful atmosphere combined with all of the factors I mentioned before had completely brought me into the pants-shitting zone. And when I came across a power line that needed to have the power cut, and I went to cut the power, which turned off all the lights, I was anything but prepared for what was gonna come. Turning off the power didn't just make the lights go dark, it also triggered the monsters. And they started coming at me. And the monsters in Afraid of Monsters are scary. Really fucking scary. Their movement patterns are erratic, they shake their heads, they scream, they are anything but slow, and they are never predictable and always completely random. I freaked the fuck out, I went completely primal, I was unable to think and defend myself. My brain was operating in 2 gears, just hit the melee button until something dies, or run around the thing to not get hit. I did manage to make it back to the place that was blocked by dangling wires that was prior to the power being cut, quite dangerous, but I was done, I was so fucking done, and I went to bed in my big fucking empty house. I woke up the next day, and I don't know if it was the daylight or my headspace being a bit better, but the game no longer triggered my fight or flight response, and I was able to enjoy it and make some decent progress, and really get a feel for what it's like. Aside from the intro, there isn't much in the way of cinematics or really storytelling in general. You just sort of make your way through the game while reality slowly starts to crumble around you. And while it's amazing to see a game that was made for free have this amount of attention to detail where the level design slowly makes less and less sense as you progress because of the aforementioned reality crumbling, you're not here for that, and you won't stay here for that. It's nice, but it's a good side dish to what you're here for. And what you're here for is the moment-to-moment gameplay that Half-Life and its sequels and mods are very famous for. There's so much flow in this game that you wouldn't believe it. It starts out a bit awkward as you don't really know that you need to hunt down for keys, and due to how the opening level is designed, it's a bit hard to know what locked doors to focus on getting unlocked. But once you get into the swing of things, time just fucking flies by. I was originally just gonna play the hospital chapter of the game because it's a good representation of what the game has to offer. Good guns, fun and interesting enemy designs, cool graphics and puzzles that are very basic but on purpose so that you're more invested in experiencing your surroundings than looking around for whatever keycard you need. But I didn't stop at the hospital. I got into the elevators and I was like, alright, I just need to go through to the next room. And then I went into the next room and I was like, alright, I just gotta get through this room, and so on and so on and so on. And before I knew it, I was wielding a shotgun, jumping through broken elevator shafts and battling demon dogs in underground car parks and demons spitting acids in what looks like a prison cafeteria. And I just couldn't stop, it was that addictive. But I have to, because we have to move on. But if you're a horror fan and you're not scared easily, this is a full recommendation because it's very good. It does some great things with environmental storytelling, and it's free, so you got no excuse.
This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
Half-Life Blue Shift sounds like an intriguing premise. The original Half-Life gave us Gordon Freeman's POV of the Black Mesa incident, and opposing force, the opposing view, as one of the antagonists sent in to kill any survivors, including Gordon. So the idea of playing as one of the security guards that get murdered in droves by monster soldiers, and even Gordon himself is the player so inclined, seems like a fun idea. Being put in the shoes of a Barney would surely make the game way more scary. Barney doesn't have an HEV suit to protect him, so he's more squishy, and he doesn't have the military training that Adrian Shepard has, so he's less formidable against the enemies. So the obvious route for a game like this would be to make it a bit of a survival horror affair, where the player spends just as much time running from gunfire as they do dishing it out. Unfortunately, Barney's standalone adventure is nothing like that. It's just Half-Life except you play as a Barney. The opening plays exactly like the opening of Half-Life 1. You're on the tram and you see all the impressive things that the engine can do, but unlike the original, the tech isn't impressive anymore. It's been 3 years, and in those 3 years, games went from looking like, well, Half-Life to not looking like Half-Life. So what you're left with playing through is a game that looks like Half-Life and kind of plays like Half-Life, but not as impressive because for one, games are just better now in 2001, and for second, it's just a little worse than Half-Life in all facets except visuals. The level design isn't as good, the enemy placement isn't as good, the puzzles aren't as good, and it just kind of sucks overall. And it seems that the makers of the mod that we're actually here to talk about felt the same way, and in 2001, the very fucking same year the Blue Shift came out, they released Azure Sheep. And it does everything right that its official counterpart does wrong. There is no long-winded tutorial on a tram, instead you just wake up, go to your posting, let Gordon Freeman in his red sports car through the gate, because of course a ponytail-looking motherfucking scientist drives one of those. And as Gordon makes his way through the facility, shit of course hits the fan real fucking fast, and before you know it, you're fighting Vortigons that take off half your health with a single hit, while counting the bullets in your shitty little Beretta and chasing after your girlfriend to see if she is alright. Azure Sheep completely fucking understands what it is about the Barney premise that makes it interesting. The enemies in the mod are very scary, they hit very hard, they take a fair bit of ammo to take down, and they feel smarter than the base game enemies, and the game feels smarter in general. Original Half-Life could often boil down to entering a series of corridors, mowing down everything in them, and then moving on to the next. But here it feels like running is not just an option, but sometimes the only option, and it's great. It might not at the surface look like it fits with other games we'll be looking at in this video, as it's not a horror game, but it works like one. It understands what it is that makes games scary, and it utilizes those same tools to keep the players on their toes. It puts armed dangerous soldiers around corners like here, forcing the player to be really creative if they want to take them down, and make the enemy shoot at them and then hide behind cover, and then in between shots, pop out and take them down. And then 10 paces down the path, it forces the player to do the exact opposite by placing a turret at the end of a long narrow path, forcing the player to now charge into the open and circle around the turret and take it down. And every encounter is like that, and it doesn't wear out its welcome. There is no encounter present that feels cheap, it all feels like it should. When you fail, you don't feel angry at the game, you feel angry at yourself, and while certain encounters can be frustrating, it's always worth it to stick it out and figure out how to get past them, because it's so fucking satisfying when you finally do. Azure Sheep slaps, and it's a joy to play from start to finish, and it honestly might be better than the game it's based on, because it seems to understand how that game works better than Valve did when they made it. And the most obvious way it proves this is its level design. Every room is unique and interesting, every encounter does something new. You'll be fighting off turrets in a Matrix-inspired hallway, facing off against assassins alongside Gordon fucking Freeman in an arena-style warehouse, and you'll be crawling through very spooky vents, looking for places where headcrabs could hide and attack you. It's amazing, and you should play it right now because it's fun. While it's not strictly a horror game like I said earlier, it will still startle the shit out of you at least half a dozen times. Released in 2012, E7 Blackstar is a very late mod in terms of Half-Life 1 modding, releasing well after anyone had given up on wishing for Half-Life 3, and it very much shows. What I mean by that is that the mod uses a lot of tricks and engine fuckery that earlier Half-Life 1 mods have not been able to rely on. There is a lot of scripts present here and even new mechanics, and it's probably better if I just show you. E7 Blackstar is what I call a might as well be canon scenario. It takes place at the same time as the events of Half-Life 1, but at the E7 Blackstar facility, the Russian arm of the Shadow Corporation that runs Black Mesa. Here we get an insight into what kind of operation that G-Man was running behind the scenes, and a reason as to why he seemed to travel to and from Black Mesa all the time. Blackstar, as the name suggests, is a black site, an off-the-books prison for undesirables that the Russians deem a hazard to public perception to such a degree that they don't want to deal with them, so they stick them here. You're one of those undesirables, a political prisoner forced to spend their days testing out this new technology called an HEV suit. But during a routine hazard course, you manage to trigger an alarm, and this gives you a window to escape, and you use it and do so. You must now, for the first third of the game, sneak your way through the facility, looking for a way out, and that is where some of the new gameplay mechanics I talked about come into place. Because Blackstar is partially a stealth game where you must avoid enemy line of sight and trigger accidents to distract guards so that you can sneak past them and make your way further into the facility. And before it ever gets boring, you then come across a gun and start fighting off armed personnel that have zeroed in on your position. And very much like a sure sheep, it's very tense because you're low on ammo and the enemy's bullets hurt a whole lot. It's also very dark and very spooky, and as you make your way through the increasingly dark and dilapidated facility, the armed personnel gets replaced by horrific monsters that want to chomp on you, as well as the usual stable of Half-Life monsters like those dog thingies and headcrabs. Because it turns out, you didn't quite trigger the accident that let you escape, something else did, and it brought with them beings from Zen. Slav life is a good time and it's not too long, so the scares and novelty of the new mechanics never has a chance to wear out. And it's a very competent addition to the Half-Life mythos, and given Blue Shift's quality, or well, lack thereof, it can easily stand shoulder to shoulder with the official expansions. And now onto something completely different. Released in 2003 and later remade in 2009, Heart of Evil opens up as you wake up as a Captain Colonel person named Percy Freeman during the Vietnam War. A person knocks on our door and asks us if we're ready, and we head off to meet up with Command in what is so far the most impressive opening of any Half-Life mod we've looked at so far, absolutely surpassing the original in terms of technical prowess. Command informs us that a Colonel Kurtz, yes, like in Apocalypse Now, has gone AWOL, yes, also like in Apocalypse Now, and that we're being sent in to find him, yes, again, exactly like Apocalypse Now. Assigned to be our driver is the guy who drove us here, and his name is Bonnie. Yes, we do play as a man named Freeman, and our trusty sidekick is a dude named Bonnie. And yes, these two characters could be the parents of the main characters from the original Half-Life, and no, I don't hate it, I think it's kind of cute. We drive off and join a raid on a village and look for Kurtz, and it's really fucking impressive. Like, the scripting that's at work here is better than in a lot of modern games, which looks all the more impressive when filtered through this engine, which has aged about as well as dog shit flavored milk. During the raid we are ambushed and Colonel Kurtz's men show up, but before they can kill us, a villager throws a grenade, and as it blows, all hell breaks loose. We fight our way past Kurtz's forces, and while in some tunnels we come across weird monster things that we also dispatch before making it to the other side, and battling it out with a helicopter before exiting the village in a daring escape via a truck we just hotwired. We arrive at a nearby military facility to seek refuge, but things here are anything but safe. We immediately notice all the corpses strewn about the place, and before we can figure out what killed them, the doors to the inner part of the base burst open, and out shambles crowds of walking corpses towards us. We kill them and begin fighting our way past more of them inside, as well as more of the creepy monsters that we encountered in the tunnels. And during our journey through the bowels of the base, Curtis' men show up and it becomes a three-way fight. More monsters show up as well as helicopters and tanks, and the whole thing is a massively chaotic spectacle. And it's an incredibly immersive experience despite the very dated visuals. And we gotta move on before I get too into it. And finally, as the last stop for today, Paranoia. While originally released in 2007, the port we are about to play is the updated 10-year anniversary port, and you can definitely tell. It is beautiful to the point that it looks like a Source game on medium graphics, and it doesn't exactly play like a regular Half-Life game either, acting much more like Counter-Strike Source. You play as a Russian Spetsnaz agent who has just returned to duty after being injured in combat. As you complete your qualifications to rejoin the ranks of your military brothers, an alarm is sounded, and you and your team is called to intervene in a hostage situation at a power plant. Things quickly go from bad to very much worse, and before we know it, we're fighting our way through the facility, and the run and gun gameplay of Half-Life 1 is completely replaced by calculated tactical actions. You can't take a lot of damage, and neither can your enemies. So there is little dodging involved like there is in Half-Life, and you're instead very focused on always entering a room from the right angle, always giving you the best opportunity to shoot first should an enemy appear in your line of sight. It's very good, and I'm reminded a lot of playing SWAT 4, and it's almost like the game could read my mind and knew that I had always thought that SWAT would make a great horror game, because all of a sudden Paranoia becomes just that. Despite the Spetsnaz's best efforts, the terrorists managed to do what they were here to do and set off some sort of explosion. We're knocked out in classic horror game fashion, and when we come to, it's of course several hours later and we're left trying to figure out what happened. We start making our way back to our team, and while we do so, we're in contact with a team of scientists that have been sent to contain a radiation breach. But before we can link up with them, we hear them on the radio as they get brutally murdered by something that doesn't sound quite like it speaks Arabic. And when we turn up ourselves to where they were supposed to be, we are met with the sight of bodies, guts and gore being strewn all over the place. The bodies that haven't completely been ripped to shreds begin chasing us, and we put them down and make our way into an elevator to meet up with the scientist who tells us that something is going on. Which, no shit, why is there a temple in the tunnels beneath a power plant? Why are there zombies, and why are there terrorists trying to free the zombies? Before we can get any answers, a strange chant in Russian starts playing, and the complex is assaulted by gun-wielding mutants. And that marks the real beginning of the game. It's from here on out a straight-up horror game where we fight monsters, mutants and everything in between that also goes bump in the night. And we do that along our team in true tactical shooter fashion. And the constant switch between using aggressive tactics on the mindless monsters and defensive tactics against the mutants and terrorists means that the game is never boring. It's never predictable and it always keeps you on your toes, and that definitely heightens the scare factor of it all. It's really good, and the setup is really interesting, and I haven't seen this blend of subgenres put together in this way. Not in movies, not in games, and the irresistible allure of the combination of religion, cults, monsters, and Russian Duma attitudes and cult era-ish settings makes this one a must play. that was a cursory look at what I think are some underrated horror games that are sort of only available on the PC, with Blackstar also being available on the Dreamcast of all things, thanks to the homebrew community of course. I call these underrated because while they are critically acclaimed Half-Life 1 mods that saw much success and press during the time when they came out, it has been a while between the 2000s and the 2020s. And while we do occasionally hear about an ambitious Half-Life 1 mod coming out, like Half-Life Echoes released last year I think, the scene is not what it used to be. And the people that once made these mods have moved on to making actual independent games, such as the team behind Paranoia, moving on to make a full-fledged sequel in a new engine and releasing that game commercially. So the games are definitely underrated PC games, because we as a horror community should be talking about them a whole lot more than we do, which is, we don't. And they are free, which is the cheapest price there is, and these 5 aren't the only ones. There are dozens upon dozens of quality spooky titles that all do things with the genre that hasn't been done before or since, and they're worth exploring just to experience something new, even if that new thing is a 20-year-old mod. I thoroughly enjoyed all of these, which is why I put them on the list, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would definitely be a toss-up between Afraid of Monsters and Paranoia. Paranoia is absolutely the technically superior game and is the best Half-Life can be, and its story, gameplay and level design and atmosphere far surpasses the game that it's based on. But Afraid of Monsters scares the absolute fucking shit out of me, and it is without the doubt the spookiest fucking game I have ever played, so if I had to pick one, I would definitely pick that one. I really wish that Valve would just make the Gold Source engine available for developers to freely use and publish games for commercially, because I think the fact that it's not is robbing future horror gamers of really stellar experiences. Just because they don't know that there's a whole genre of Half-Life horror out there that is far better than most of the stuff that comes out today, and it's all available for completely free. I hope you've enjoyed this video, because I've enjoyed making it. I grew up on Half-Life mods because I lived in a rural area without any game stores nearby. So I played a lot of mods for the original Half-Life 1, both single player and multiplayer, since they were available online when actual games weren't. And I forged friendships that have lasted through to this day because of this engine. And I've had experiences that have colored my perception of what makes a good story to such a degree that I unintentionally rip them off in my own creative works and don't notice until I play the actual mod that I stole the idea from. I hope you see something here that you like, and I hope that you play it. And as always, if you have any Half-Life 1 horror mod suggestions of your own, feel free to comment them down below, and if there is an audience for it, I'm open to making a follow-up with your suggestions, but that's it for me for now. Until next time, good night.